Flashing red lights, sirens piercing the silence. A lone man in a Soviet bunker stares at the screens. 5 missiles, the world at stake, and time slipping away. Every procedure demands action, yet instinct whispers doubt. What stopped disaster? What held the world back by mere minutes? Watch closely, because the deadliest night you've never heard of is about to be revealed. In the cold, tense nights of the early 1980s, the world was a tinderbox, and humanity did not even know it. The devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had proved that a single nation could annihilate millions in a matter of hours. By the end of World War II, that destructive power no longer belonged to just one country. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against a common enemy, now faced each other across an ideological and technological chasm. Capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarian control, freedom versus fear. Each side was convinced that the other posed an existential threat, and each prepared with an intensity that few could comprehend. The Cold War was not fought with soldiers on the battlefield. It was fought with secrets, spies, policies, and the quiet, constant preparation to destroy the other completely. By the 1980s, both superpowers had accumulated nuclear arsenals beyond imagination. Tens of thousands of warheads, capable of annihilating civilization many times over, sat ready in silos, submarines, and strategic bombers. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, was the fragile thread keeping the world from disaster. The theory was simple. If one side fired, the other would respond with equal or greater force, ensuring total destruction for both. That certainty, however terrifying, was supposed to prevent anyone from striking first. But what the doctrine could not prevent were mistakes. And mistakes had the power to end everything. Tensions between Washington and Moscow were at their peak. President Ronald Reagan's rhetoric against the Soviet Union was aggressive, branding it the evil empire, while the Soviets watched every American military exercise as a potential first strike. Earlier that year, the world had witnessed the tragedy of Korean Airlines Flight 007, which strayed into Soviet airspace and was shot down, killing 269 civilians. The outrage and fear this generated only amplified the paranoia of Soviet leaders. Every movement, every radar blip, every signal was interpreted as a potential prelude to nuclear war. The Soviet Union relied on a sophisticated early warning system known as OCO, designed to detect missile launches from American territory using infrared satellites. The idea was simple: detect, report, and retaliate if necessary. Time was the critical factor. Once a missile was detected, decision-makers had only minutes to act. That brief window was all the difference between survival and complete annihilation. Human beings, despite their judgment and reasoning, were considered too slow, too prone to hesitation. Machines, in theory, would remove doubt. But machines can fail, and on September 26, 1983, they almost did. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer at Serpukhov-15, the Soviet command center responsible for monitoring the satellite network. He was not a general or politician. He was an engineer, trained to understand the system he monitored. On that night, he was alone in a bunker, surrounded by screens and blinking lights. The weight of responsibility was immense, but at that moment, he had no idea that a single decision he was about to make would determine the fate of millions. At 12:14 a.m. Moscow time, the silence of the bunker was shattered. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. The ecosystem reported a missile launch from the United States, then a second missile, then a third. Within moments, it indicated a full-scale attack. Standard protocol demanded immediate reporting to higher authorities, which could trigger automatic retaliation. In the command room, tension escalated instantly. Officers reached for phones, prepared to follow procedure. The fate of the world hung by a thread. Petrov looked at the screens, but something felt wrong. Only 5 missiles? That made no sense. A real American first strike would involve hundreds, designed to ensure total destruction. The incomplete data suggested a malfunction, but if he doubted the system and it was right, the consequences would be immediate and catastrophic. Every second that passed increased the risk. The computers were confident, the alarms relentless, the human instinct screaming. And yet, he hesitated. He recalled discussions with engineers about the system's flaws, about the rare but possible false alarms caused by sunlight reflecting off clouds at high altitude. He weighed the possibilities: obey protocol and risk triggering nuclear war on a false alarm, or trust his judgment and delay reporting. The stakes were unimaginable. If he reported the alert as real, the Soviet leadership would likely retaliate instantly. American radar would detect Soviet missiles and respond. Within an hour, a nuclear exchange could decimate entire cities. Tens of millions could die instantly. Hundreds of millions more would face radiation, starvation, and collapse of societies. Civilization itself could end in minutes. Petrov made a choice. He reported the alert as a system malfunction, not a confirmed attack. He defied protocol. He gambled with the fate of the world. The officers in the room stared, waiting, unsure. Ground-based radar systems, slower but more reliable, began their checks. Slowly, the impossible truth emerged. The alarms were false. No missiles were incoming. Sunlight reflecting off clouds had fooled the satellites. Humanity had survived not because of machines, not because of protocols, but because one man trusted his judgment. There was no celebration. Petrov faced criticism for disobeying procedure. The Soviet Union valued adherence over independent thought. For years, the incident remained classified. The public knew nothing. Only decades later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, did historians and journalists piece together what had happened. When the world learned the story, disbelief spread. How could the fate of humanity rest on the intuition of one individual? The incident revealed a terrifying reality. Even the most advanced systems can fail, and the line between survival and destruction can be impossibly thin. The Cold War could have ended not with diplomacy, not with negotiation, but with a single human decision made in a quiet bunker. That decision was the difference between life and obliteration. History would later recognize this event as a lesson in the fragility of peace, the limits of technology, and the indispensable role of human judgment. Had Petrov followed protocol, the outcome would have been unthinkable. The Soviet command would have been notified, and in the urgency to respond, nuclear missiles aimed at the United States would have launched within minutes. American early warning systems, detecting the incoming Soviet strikes, would have responded automatically. Within an hour, major cities across both nations would have been obliterated. Millions of lives would have ended instantly, and the skies could have been darkened for years by radioactive fallout. The death toll would have extended far beyond the superpowers as radiation, climate disruption, and societal collapse spread globally. Civilization, as it had developed over centuries, might have been reduced to scattered survival, a shadow of the world that existed before. For Petrov, every second that night was a balancing act between obedience and survival. He had to weigh the credibility of a system designed to prevent catastrophe against the incomprehensible consequences if it was wrong. The silence of the room, punctuated only by the persistent red lights, seemed almost surreal. Outside, the world slept, unaware that at that very moment, the Earth's future depended on the judgment of a single man in a Soviet bunker. As the minutes dragged on, ground radar confirmed what Petrov had suspected. No missiles were inbound. The false alarm revealed the limitations of even the most sophisticated early warning technology. Satellites, no matter how advanced, could misinterpret natural phenomena as imminent threats. Clouds reflected sunlight in a way that fooled the infrared sensors. Machines, designed to act without hesitation, had produced a warning based on a flaw no human could have anticipated. In that moment, human intuition, skepticism, and calm thinking had prevented an unthinkable disaster. The aftermath of that night was shrouded in secrecy. Petrov faced no hero's recognition. The Soviet Union criticized him for failing to follow procedure, a stark reminder that courage and judgment are often invisible in bureaucracies. Decades later, when the story emerged publicly, it became one of the most astonishing examples of near catastrophe in human history. Scholars, journalists, and historians studied the event, marveling at how close the world had come to nuclear annihilation. It was a stark lesson. The most dangerous wars may never be fought openly, yet they can end civilization silently if systems fail and judgment is absent. The story of 1983 also revealed the terrifying fragility of nuclear deterrence. Mutually assured destruction was supposed to guarantee peace through fear, but it could also become a trap. One technical glitch, one misinterpreted signal, one unrecognized anomaly, and the consequences could have been total. Humanity's survival in this case had depended entirely on awareness, knowledge, and intuition. Petrov's calm reasoning prevented a chain reaction that, had it begun, would have erased tens of millions and set the world on a path of unimaginable destruction. This event, though little known at the time, became a critical lesson for nations and military systems. It showed that no automated system can fully replace human discernment in matters of life and death. Redundancies, fail-safes, and checks were strengthened in the years following the incident, as both superpowers sought to ensure that such a mistake would never occur again. International dialogues, treaties, and agreements were also influenced indirectly by the silent shadow of that night. Leaders understood, even if the public did not, how precarious the world really was. In reflecting upon this night, one must consider not only the extraordinary stakes, but the fragile humanity that preserved the world. Petrov's decision was not dramatic in a conventional sense. No heroics, no battle cries, no medals at the time. Just quiet, reasoned judgment under the heaviest pressure imaginable. It was an invisible act, one that did not make headlines or fill newspapers for years, and yet, its impact was greater than many celebrated victories or tragedies of the 20th century. In that darkness, amidst beeping alarms and flashing lights, the survival of civilization hung by a single human choice. As decades have passed, this story has grown in importance. It reminds us of the dangers inherent in over-reliance on technology, the perils of miscommunication, and the delicate balance of global security. The Cold War ended without a nuclear exchange, but the lessons remain relevant. In an era of ever-increasing technological complexity, the responsibility of those who oversee systems of unimaginable power cannot be overstated. One decision, one judgment call, can determine not just the fate of a nation but the fate of the world. What truly held that night was not protocol, not machinery, nor bureaucratic procedure. It was awareness, experience, and courage, the quiet, deliberate choice of a single man. A choice that prevented an irreversible disaster. History sometimes moves silently, its greatest turning points unnoticed, its heroes uncelebrated. The events of September 26, 1983, are a reminder that the line between survival and annihilation can be invisible, and that the world owes its continued existence to vigilance and discernment that often go unseen. And while the Cold War may have faded, the world today still carries the legacy of that night. Nations hold arsenals capable of global destruction. Systems are far more advanced than in 1983, but the principle remains: human judgment is the final safeguard. It is a sobering reminder that despite technological progress, human responsibility continues to be the most crucial factor in the preservation of life on Earth. To understand fully what happened that night, to grasp the terror and near catastrophe, to appreciate how a simple misinterpretation of light and clouds could have ended everything, one must reflect on the delicate web of systems, decisions, and errors that define our modern world. Humanity survived not because of certainty, not because of flawless planning, but because of a single clear-headed choice made under unimaginable pressure. That choice continues to resonate, a testament to both the vulnerability and resilience of civilization. And if you want to know exactly what happened that night, the full sequence of Eve, NTS, the decisions, and the minute-by-minute unfolding of history, stay with this documentary until the end. Because the truth of September 26, 1983, is both terrifying and awe-inspiring. A story of near annihilation that remains one of the most critical moments in modern history. In the days and weeks that followed, the 1983 incident remained hidden within the walls of the Soviet military complex. No headlines, no public announcements, no fanfare. Only classified reports and hushed conversations confirmed what had almost occurred. Analysts would later reconstruct the event, revealing that the world had come within minutes, mere minutes, of a nuclear exchange that could have killed tens of millions instantly and set humanity on a path of unimaginable suffering. The thought of what could have happened remains difficult to grasp. The collapse of global economies, the obliteration of entire cities, the permanent contamination of vast swaths of land, and the psychological scars that would have persisted for generations. Civilization had been spared, but only by a slender thread. Stanislav Petrov's decision, so quietly made, would later be recognized as heroic. In interviews conducted decades afterward, he downplayed the significance of his choice, insisting that he had simply trusted his judgment. Yet the magnitude of that judgment cannot be overstated. It was the calm discernment of one man that prevented history's darkest hour. No automated system, no chain of command, no prot. Okol could have substituted for the awareness and reasoning that he applied in that critical moment. It was not luck alone. It was understanding, training, and courage. The incident also revealed the terrifying limitations of early warning technology. Satellites, no matter how advanced, could misinterpret environmental phenomena. A reflection of sunlight off clouds, something so ordinary in daily life, became the catalyst for a near-global catastrophe. Machines alone, without the intervention of human insight, were incapable of distinguishing reality from illusion. And yet, the systems were trusted implicitly, and they nearly delivered a death sentence for the world. Historians, military experts, and political analysts have since studied this event extensively, piecing together its implications. The 1983 false alarm highlighted the vulnerability of the nuclear deterrent system and emphasized the importance of human judgment in critical decision-making. It also underscored the potential for accidents, miscommunication, or technical failures to trigger events that even the most carefully designed protocols could not prevent. In other words, the mechanisms designed to keep the peace were also capable of starting the greatest war in human history. For decades, the story remained largely unknown to the general public. Petrov's role was classified. He received no immediate recognition, and in some ways, He was reprimanded for failing to follow standard procedures. The world learned about the incident only many years later, as documents were declassified and interviews made public. The revelation astonished audiences worldwide, illustrating how close humanity had come to self-destruction and how fragile the balance of nuclear deterrence truly was. The psychological impact of the event is difficult to measure. The knowledge that a single misinterpreted signal could trigger global annihilation is a profound reminder of the stakes inherent in human technological development. It also provides a sobering reflection on the responsibilities that come with power. The 1983 incident is a case study in the limits of automation and the necessity of human oversight. Without a single man's intervention, the world might have experienced an unprecedented and irreversible disaster. In the broader context of the Cold War, this event exemplifies the ever-present tension and fear that defined international relations in the late 20th century. Governments operated under constant suspicion, with nuclear arsenals poised for launch at a moment's notice. The balance of power was delicate, maintained by protocols that left little room for error, yet ultimately safeguarded by the judgment of individuals willing to question the system. The lesson remains clear: technology is powerful, but the human mind and conscience remain the ultimate guardians of life. Petrov's quiet heroism also reminds us that history is often shaped by unseen choices. The dramatic battles and geopolitical maneuverings that dominate textbooks are only part of the story. Equally significant are the moments of decision that go unnoticed. Choices made in silence, without recognition, and with consequences that can reverberate across the globe. One person, acting with clarity and restraint, can prevent catastrophe. One choice, made under extraordinary pressure, can safeguard millions of lives. The 1983 false alarm also prompted both the United States and the Soviet Union to review their systems, improve redundancies, and enhance the reliability of their early warning mechanisms. Lessons learned from that night have influenced nuclear policy, command protocols, and global security strategies to this day. While the Cold War eventually ended without a nuclear exchange, the event serves as a perpetual warning. The potential for error always exists, and the cost of misjudgment is unimaginably high. Even now, decades later, the story resonates. In a world increasingly reliant on automated systems, in which technology often dictates decisions with life or death consequences, the incident of September 26, 1983, serves as a reminder that human judgment remains irreplaceable. The future, no matter how technologically advanced, will always depend on the clarity, courage, and discernment of those tasked with the ultimate responsibility. And so, the night that could have ended civilization quietly passed into history. Millions remained unaware, going to sleep, waking up, and continuing in their lives, oblivious to the near catastrophe that had occurred. Yet the lesson endures. The fate of the world is sometimes held in the hands of one person, one decision, one moment of reason amidst chaos. As we reflect on this story, we must ask ourselves, how often do we trust machines without question? How often do we surrender judgment to protocol, procedure, or system, assuming that errors are impossible? And above all, how many times does history quietly depend on the courage, awareness, and discernment of a single human being? On that night in 1983, the world was saved by one man. Not a leader, not a general, not a politician. A man who trusted his mind when the machines were wrong. A man whose judgment prevented the most catastrophic war in human history. What actually held the world from destruction was not a system, not a policy, not the threat of retaliation. It was the calm, deliberate, and extraordinary decision of one individual. And if you want to understand fully what happened that night, the exact sequence of events, The near misses, the decisions, and the consequences that could have erased life as we know it. Stay with this documentary until the very end, because the truth of September 26, 1983 is both terrifying and awe-inspiring. A story that reminds us that sometimes history is determined not by armies or treaties, but by quiet judgment in the shadows of secrecy. The world did not end that night, but it came closer than most of us can imagine. One person's choice preserved millions of lives and the future itself. And the question remains, how close are we today to another unseen edge? And who will stand between us and oblivion?